Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Today we'll hear from Srimad Bhagawatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, text 43. Vishvasya
Vishvasya
Janma
Janma
Sthiti
Sthiti
Samyamarte
Samyamarte
Vishvasya Janma Sthiti Samyamarte
Vishvasya Janma Sthiti Samyamarte
Kritavatarasya
Kirtanasya
Padambhujam
Madambujam
Te
Te
Kritavatarasya Padambhujam Te
Ritavarasya Padambujate
Vrajema
Rajema
Sarve
Sarve
Sharanam
Sharanam
Yat
Yat
Isha
Isha
Brajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha
Rajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha
Smritam
Smritam
Prayachati
Prayachati
Abhayam
Abhayam
Svapumsam
Svapumsam
Smritam Prayachatyabhayam Svapumsam
Smritam Prayachati Svapumsam
Vishvasya Janma Sthiti Samyamarte
Vishvasya Janma Sthiti Samyamarte
Kritavatarasya Padambhujam Te
Ritavarasya Padambujam Te
Brajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha
Rajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha
Smritam Prachatyabhayam Svapumsam
Smritam Prayachayam Svapumsam
Vishvasya Janma Sthiti Samyamarte
Vishvasya Janma Sthiti Samyamarte
Kritavatarasya Padambhujam Te
Ritavarasya Padambujam Te
Brajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha
Rajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha
Smritam Prayachatyabhayam Svapumsam.
Smritam Prayachayam Svapumsam
Others, please.
Vishvasya Janma Sthiti Samyamarte Vishvasya Janma Sthiti Samyamarte Ritavarasya Padambujam Te Ritavarasya Padambujam Te Rajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha Rajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha Smritam Prayachat Abhayam Svapumsam Smritam Prayachat Abhayam Svapumsam Vishvasya janma siti samyamarte Kritavarasya padam bhujante Rajana sarve saranam yadisha Smritam prayate abhayam swapumsam
Vishvasya janma stuti smanyanarta
Vishvasya janma siti samyamarte
Kritavarasya param vijante
Kritavarasya bhujante
Ajam sarve saranam yadisha
Rajana sarve saranam yadisha
Smritam vijatya sayam swapumsam
Smritam prayachati abhayam swapumsam
Synonyms. Vishvasya,
Vishvasya
of the cosmic universe.
of the cosmic universe
Janma,
Janma
creation.
creation
Sthiti,
Sthiti
maintenance.
maintenance
Samyama arte,
Samyama arte
for the dissolution also.
for the dissolution also
Krita,
Krita
accepted or assumed.
accepted or assumed
Avatarasya,
Avatarasya
of the incarnations.
of the incarnations
Pada ambujam,
Maharaj
lotus feet.
Lotus feet
Te,
Te
your.
Your
Prajema,
Prajema
let us take shelter of.
Let us take shelter of
Sarve,
Sarve
all of us.
all of us
Sharanam,
Sharanam
shelter.
shelter
Yet
Yat
that which.
that which
Isha,
Isha
O Lord.
O Lord
Smritam,
Smritam
remembrance.
remembrance
Prayachati,
Prayachati
awarding.
awarding
Abhayam,
Abhayam
courage.
courage
Swapumsam,
Swapumsam
of the devotees.
of the devotees
Translation. Just thought of another. O Lord, you assume incarnations for the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the cosmic manifestation. And therefore we take shelter of your lotus feet, because they always award remembrance and courage to your devotees. Responsibly, please. O Lord,
O Lord
you assume incarnations
you assume incarnations
for the creation,
for the creation
maintenance,
maintenance
and dissolution
and dissolution
of the cosmic manifestation.
of the cosmic manifestation
And therefore,
and therefore
we all take shelter of your lotus feet,
we all take shelter of your lotus feet
because they always award remembrance and courage
because they always award remembrance and courage
to your devotees.
to your devotees.
Just going through the word for word made me think of another verse. So indulge me just for a second. Srila Prabhupada's purport. For the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the cosmic manifestations, there are three incarnations, Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshvara, Lord Shiva. They are controllers or masters of the three modes of material nature, which cause the phenomenal manifestation. Vishnu is the master of the mode of goodness, Brahma the master of the mode of passion, and Maheshwara is the master of the mode of ignorance. There are different kinds of devotees according to the modes of nature. Persons in the mode of goodness worship Lord Vishnu. Those in the mode of passion worship Lord Brahma, and those in the mode of ignorance worship Lord Shiva. All three of these deities are incarnations of the Supreme Lord Krishna because he is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. The demigods directly refer to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord and not to the different incarnations. The incarnation of Vishnu in the material world is, however, directly worshipped by the demigods. It is learned from various scriptures that the demigods approach Lord Vishnu in the ocean of milk and submit their grievances whenever there's some difficulty in the administration of universal affairs. Although they are incarnations of the Lord, Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva worship Lord Vishnu, and thus they are counted among demigods and not as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Persons who worship Lord Vishnu are called demigods, and persons who do not do so are called asuras or demons. Vishnu always takes the part of the demigods, but Brahma and Shiva sometimes take the side of the demons. It's not that they become one in interest with them, but sometimes they do something in order to gain control over the demons. Om Ajnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Mukhaṁ Karoti Vachalam Angum Langhayate Jatkripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataram Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Didati Svapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhishcha Kripa Sindhubhye Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Vishvasya Janmastiti Samyamarte Kritavatarasya Padambujante Vrajema Sarve Sharanam Yadisha Shmitam Prayachatya Bhayam Svapumsam. O Lord, you assume incarnations for the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the cosmic manifestation, and therefore we all take shelter of your lotus feet because they always award remembrance and courage to your devotees. So there are a couple of words that we've encountered recently that we might just note. Sharanam, taking shelter, surrendering to. That's one. Oh, Padambujam. We've had a lot of references to lotus feet over the last few weeks. Prayachati Abhayam. Smritam Prayachati Abhayam. Remembering those lotus feet awards Abhayam, courage, fearlessness. It's my middle name. My middle name is Abhay, fearless. And there's a reason for that. That was because I had reservations about entering the sannyas ashram, so I was given a name that would, one, give me courage, and two, connect me to the shelter of Srila Prabhupada's Bhakti Abhaya Ashram. So there's what I was looking for here was in the 22nd chapter of the Madhya Lila, Chaitanya Charitamrita's Madhya Lila, in Sanatan, in Mahaprabhu's instructions to Sanatana Goswami, in this 22nd chapter, he talks about things that are very supportive, actually also themselves angas of bhakti. Talks about attitudes behind bhakti, and then he explains the 64 main angas or aspects or practices of sadhana bhakti. And before he gets, this is something I've done probably a bazillion and a half times before, but this is just like kind of part of my everyday thing for the last more than 51 years now. Lord Chaitanya is instructing Sanatana Goswami about taking shelter of the Lord. It's talking about, actually I was probably pretty close now that I think about it. He was talking about the 6 aspects of surrender. I'm probably not going to find it gracefully. And he tells Sanatan that if someone approaches the Lord and says to him, "My dear Lord Krishna, although I have forgotten you for so many long years in this material world, now I am surrendering to you. I am your sincere and serious servant. Please engage me in your service." He says this is a very important attitude with which to approach the Lord. And then, as Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami always does, Rupa Goswami does the same thing in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and Ujjvala Nilamani. He backs it up with evidence from revealed scriptures. And in this case, he cites part of a verse from the Ramayana. And I believe, if I remember correctly, this is where Vibhishana has, with considerable trepidation, approached the Lord. He's flipped. He's changed sides. He's seen the error of following his brother, whose name is, the hint was Lord Ramchandra. Vibhishana, his older brother was Ravana. So he realizes this is not my thing. I don't fit in well on this side of the story. So he approaches the Lord, and he does so with considerable trepidation because it's the end, right? He's from the other side, and so it might not turn out well for him. But Lord Ramchandra assures him that this is natural. This is just civilized behavior. We even supposedly know this in modern warfare around the world, that if someone surrenders, you give them shelter. It's just that easy, just that simple. And so Lord Ramchandra assures Vibhishana that if someone approaches me and says to me, if someone approaches me and says to me just once, sincerely and seriously, "My dear Lord, from this day I am yours," I immediately give that person shelter. And if they want courage, I give them courage. I give them fearlessness. So, as I mentioned too many times, this is a daily practice for me. This is one of the, I have a whole set of things that I recite when I wake up before I do anything else. And this is the last item in that string of was maybe 6, 7, 8 different prayers. And I say it in English, and I've been practicing, because Lord Ramchandra says if somebody says this just once, seriously and sincerely, so I've been practicing since 1970, since I first read this in Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And hoping that one of these days I'll be able to say it seriously and sincerely, and I'll get that shelter and I'll get that courage. But this was also part of our practice in the Gurukulas, at least back when I was teaching. I think it was like at Bhaktivedanta Village, I think it was just before the kids' japa session. We would have them recite these two things together. My dear Lord Krishna, although I have forgotten you for so many long years in this material world, now I am surrendering to you. I am your sincere and serious servant. Please engage me in your service. And then we would tack on this from Ramayana. My dear Lord, from this day I am yours. And it's a nice practice because it creates progressively deep impressions, or in the chitta, samskaras in the subtle body of the jiva who practices this. And as I mentioned the other day, one of my friends was talking about samskaras the other day, and he says, yes, the samskaras that we pick up in the world often leave some scars on our chitta. I like that. It sounded like he had heard that from somebody else, so I wasn't exactly sure of its provenance, but I thought it was a nice, playful way of dealing with this. So, and this is the purpose for our especially our daily practices. Chanting a fixed number of rounds every day, rising early to greet the Lord with kirtan every day, and worship Tulsi, worshiping the spiritual master, hearing Srimad Bhagawatam. That these nitya practices, these regular practices, they help create these grooves in the devotees' hearts. And so we take shelter of these as well. So here are the demigods. This is Maitreya this is Maitreya by way of asserting that it is indeed the Supreme Personality of Godhead who we've come to hear about and remember. So here he's showing how all the great Ishvaras of the material world are actually subordinate, including Brahma and Shiva, who may or may not be exactly jivas. Shiva is kind of his own tattva, he has his own essence. Not exactly jiva, but not exactly Vishnu tattva either. Sometimes compared to yogurt, which is milk, but it's milk that's been transformed by contact with something else. Prabhupada sometimes says tamarind. I haven't tried this. I just generally use yogurt culture. But, and Brahma is like, he's the first created being. He's directly born of the Lord. He begins his life by seeing the Lord directly, shaking the Lord's hand like a friend. I mean, that's not like somebody that we know, somebody that we run into at the airport or at Down to Earth or something like that, generally. So these are quite extraordinary personalities, hard for us, whose characteristics are such that it's difficult for us to wrap our heads around it. But still, they subordinate themselves to the Lord. Still, they worship the Lord. When there becomes a big, implacable problem, something that they can't really deal with themselves, they go to him. Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, they go to the ocean of milk and they petition the Lord. So we see this a couple of times in the Bhagavatam, and I just want to share one of them with which I'm a little familiar. And I want to give some background. So this is, God, you're going to pull the batteries out of the clock right now. Because I wanted to read this. So this is in the 4th canto. This is where Dhruva Maharaj gets instruction from Narada Muni how to approach the Lord. So just as a quick reminder, Dhruva Maharaj was the son of King Uttanapad. His great-grandfather is Lord Brahma. And King Uttanapad was particularly inclined toward another of his wives. Even though Suniti, Dhruva's mother, was his first wife, and Dhruva was the older of the 2 sons in question here, King Uttanapad was particularly affectionate toward another of his wives, Suruchi. So when her son was playing on the king's lap, the king sitting on the throne, kids playing on her lap, Dhruva thinks, yeah, I want to hang out with my father. He wants to go climb up on the lap, and Suruchi just says really nasty things to him, and essentially tells him, if you want to get up on the king's lap, if you want to have access to your father, you got to die and take birth from my womb. A little hard to even think about a mother saying. And so Dhruva freaks out. He's a little kid. Prefrontal cortex isn't very well developed. He's got another 20 years or so to go before he starts to become a full-fledged human being, if that. If then, rather. And so he just becomes completely overwhelmed by anger and grief and sadness all at once. They just kind of like well up and overtake him. He goes home and he's just completely lost it. Anybody who's been around little kids, when they completely lose it, they can't control their breathing or anything. Tears are flowing from their eyes, snot's flowing from their nose, saliva from their mouth. They can't breathe, and it's just like you can't. There's a video. There's this cool video that sometimes goes around Facebook of this little kid throwing a tantrum, maybe a year and a half old, and his father is just like super patient. He just, if the kid will let him, will hold him, pat him on the back or rub his back, but he doesn't tell him, oh, don't cry, it's going to be okay. He lets him get it out. And God, it goes on. And the father's patience is just inestimable, and then you see like fades, which means we've skipped a couple of minutes here, and the kid's still just completely out of control, and the father's just holding him, just letting him get it out. So Dhruva was like this, and his mother was like, ah! So she asked what happened, and Dhruva says, he tells her what happened, and she said, well, look, if you have a really big desire, I only know one person who can deal with it, and that's the Lord himself, Lord Vishnu. So Dhruva says, so where do I go? It's like, do I go to the mall and find like the mall Santa there or something like that? As far as I understand, what I hear from the sages, I'm a little provincial, I just kind of lived in the palace my whole life, but what I hear from the sages is that what I hear from saintly personalities is that sages go to the forest to find Lord Vishnu. So Dhruva takes off, goes to the forest, and Narada Muni sees him in the forest, so he thinks, oh, okay, so I'm going to help this boy out. So he approaches Dhruva, asks him what he's after, and Dhruva tells him, he told him the story, and he says, what I really want is a kingdom greater than my great-grandfather's. Great-grandfather's Lord Brahma. His kingdom's the entire universe. So, wow, that's a pretty big wish for a little boy. So he tells him, look, you're just a little boy, you're 4 or 5 years old. There's a time for this kind of stuff, and it's not right now. Right now, it's time for growing up, hanging out with your friends, playing ball, and that kind of stuff. And Drew said, you're not going to budge me from this. After all, his name's Dhruva. He's determined. So Dhairyat, right? So he's fixed on his goal. So when Narada Muni sees that he's not going to dissuade him, largely because of his Kshatriya nature,
Jai Shri Shri Panchatattva.
he gives him a process for obtaining audience of the Supreme Lord. So, I just want to read these verses. Because then something happens along the way that will bring us to today's verse. The great sage Narada told Dhruva Maharaj, the instruction given by your mother Suniti to follow the path of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is just suitable for you. You should therefore completely absorb yourself in the devotional service of the Lord. Any person who desires the fruits of the 4 principles of religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end, liberation, should engage himself in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead for worship of his lotus feet, yields the fulfillment of all these. Now, there's some discussion about, well, why do some devotees not get what they ask for? That's a whole different discussion. All I can have time for today is to acknowledge that it's there. My dear boy, I therefore wish all good fortune for you. In other words, good luck. Good luck with this. You should go to the bank of the Jamuna, where there is a virtuous forest named Madhuvan, and there be purified. Just by going there, one draws nearer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who always lives there. My dear boy, in the waters of the Jamuna River, which is known as Galandi, you should take 3 baths daily, because the water there is very auspicious, sacred, and clear. After bathing, you should perform necessary regulative principles for Ashtanga Yoga, and then sit down on your asana in a calm and quiet position. After sitting on your seat, practice the 3 kinds of breathing exercises, and thus gradually control the life air, the mind, and the senses. Completely free yourself from all material contamination, and with great patience begin to meditate on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then, and this is a big part of why I wanted to come back to this part, he gives a description of the form of the Lord on which he should meditate. And in the 11th canto, when the Lord describes the yoga process to Uddhava, his friend Uddhava, there's a very similar description of the Lord given. The Lord's face is perpetually very beautiful and pleasing in attitude. To the devotees who see him, he appears never to be displeased, and he is always prepared to award benedictions to them. His eyes, his nicely decorated eyebrows, his raised nose, and his broad forehead are all very beautiful. He's more beautiful than all the demigods. The Lord's form is always youthful. Every limb and every part of his body is properly formed and free from defect. His eyes and lips are pinkish, like the rising sun. Aruna. Aruna is the color of the rising sun. We used to sing, used to be our tradition for many, many years here at Novadwip. It's part of the kirtan after the Guru Puja. We would sing Udila Aruna, Udila Aruna. Yeah, this wonderful Arunodaya kirtan written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Udila Aruna. Anyway, the rising of the sun, that's how long it's been since we've sung it here. I'm not going to say anything more about that. But this is the sun, the color of the rising sun, Aruna. He's always prepared to give shelter to the surrendered soul. Oh, we just covered that. And anyone so fortunate as to look on him feels all satisfaction. The Lord is always worthy to be the master of the surrendered soul, for he is the ocean of mercy. The Lord is further described as having the mark of Srimad, or the sitting place of the goddess of fortune, and his bodily hue is deep bluish. The Lord is a person. He wears a garland of flowers, and he is eternally manifest with 4 hands, which hold, beginning from the lower left hand, a conch shell, wheel, club, and lotus flower. The entire body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, is decorated. He wears a valuable jeweled helmet, necklaces, and bracelets. His neck is adorned with the Kaustuka jewel, and he is dressed in yellow silk garments. He's decorated with small golden bells around his waist, and his lotus feet are decorated with golden ankle bells. All his bodily features are very attractive and pleasing to the eyes. He's always peaceful, calm, and quiet, and very pleasing to the eyes and the mind. Real yogis meditate on the transcendental form of the Lord as he stands on the whorl of the lotus of their hearts, the jewel-like nails of his lotus feet glittering. The Lord is always smiling, and the devotee should constantly see the Lord in this form. And as he looks very mercifully toward the devotees. In this way, the meditator should look toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the bestower of all benedictions. One who meditates in this way, concentrating his mind always on the auspicious form of the Lord, is very soon freed from all material contamination, and he does not come down from meditation on the Lord. O son of the king, now I shall speak to you the mantra which is to be chanted with this process of meditation. One who carefully chants this mantra for 7 nights can see the perfect human beings flying in the sky. The mantra is
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Thank you. So Dhruva goes to Madhavan. He bathes in the Jamuna 3 times a day. He engages in this yoga process, meditating on this form of the Lord described to him by his spiritual master Narada Muni, and engaged in progressively austere behavior. And at the end of 6 months, after having just eaten leaves that had fallen from the trees after 3 months, and then eventually just living on water, now he's living on breath, and he's taking a breath every other day. So he's become so powerful and so guru, so heavy, that he's actually kind of tilted the balance of the universe out of whack. And because he's not breathing, he's so powerful, it actually disturbs the prana that circulates throughout the universe, and it's choking up the entire universe. So the demigods, I should have brought a real book. So the demigods all go to Brahma, and eventually Lord Brahma leads all the demigods to the shore of Shvetadvip on the ocean of milk, and they petition the Lord. As follows. That tilting of the universe out of whack, it's compared to like if you put an elephant on a boat. I'm not even talking about a barge, right? You put an elephant on a boat. If the elephant's steady, that's one thing. But if she shifts her weight, then it gets really exciting for the folks on the boat, right? And they have something to write home about when they get to their next. So the demigods approach the Lord and they say, the whole universe is choked up. We don't know what the problem is. And so he says, my dear demigods, do not be perturbed by this. It's due to the severe austerity and full determination of the son of King Uttanapada, who is now fully absorbed in thought of me. He has obstructed the universal breathing process. You can safely, it'll be okay. I've got it covered. You can go back to your respective homes. I shall stop this boy in his severe acts of austerity, and he will be saved from the situation. So Dhruva, he's breathing every other day, meditating on the Lord, in his mind chanting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Why would you want to stop? Why would you budge from that? So there's only one way to stop to stop the meditation, which is to disappear from the meditation, which of course really freaks Dhruva out. It's like, whoa, what? And he opens his eyes, and there's that same form right in front of him. And this time Dhruva freaks out. And Dhruva loses it again, and he's bathing, kind of at least figuratively bathing the Lord's lotus feet with his tears. It's quite a scene. So the demigods, when they're in trouble, when they have a problem that they can't solve, they approach the Lord. So therefore, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, some of you have queued up. This is in the 7th chapter. Such a mess. Actually, there's a couple of verses leading up to it. So Krishna says, yo yo yam yam tanum bhakta. We used to say yum yum. Yo yo yam tanum bhaktam shraddhaya chittam ichati. Tasya chalam shraddham tam eva vidamyaham. I'm seated in everyone's heart as the super soul. As soon as one desires to worship the demigods, I make his faith steady so that he can devote himself to a particular deity. So essentially, there's not really anything wrong with the demigods. They are, we've read in today's purport, they're devatas, they're gods, little gods, godlets, right? And Prabhupada uses the word demigods. And they're the controllers of the universal affairs. So they're also called suras. They're godly. So Krishna says, if someone actually wants to worship the demigods, then he'll strengthen their faith so that they can do that properly. And then he says, Sataya Shraddhaya Yuktastasya Aradhanamihate Labhate Chatata Kaman Mayaiva Vitantam. Endowed with such a faith, he seeks favors of a particular demigod and attains his desires. But in actuality, Krishna says, there's a catch. In actuality, these benefits are bestowed by me alone. So therefore, he says, Antavatu palam tesham, tadbhavati alpamedisam. Ooh, alpamedisam. Like they got half a brain. Devan deva yajo yanti, madbhakta yanti mamapi. Those of small intelligence worship the demigods. Why? Well, the fruits of that worship are limited and temporary. Right? Hiranyakashipu approached Brahma, engaged in austerities that, even when we hear about him, we think, yeah, right, who could do that? He kept his air circulating in his, I don't know about dry bones, but in just his bones, because he'd given up eating for such a long time, and then anthills had built around him, and the ants, he didn't have flesh on his bones. And still he was, doing his meditation. And so Lord Brahma came to grant him what he wanted, but he had to admit to him, what you're asking, because still, I want to be immortal. I want to be God, I want to be immortal. He said, well, I can't do that. I don't have that. So it's not something I can give. I can't give something I don't have myself. So Hiranyakashipu did his bargaining with Brahma, but Brahma had to admit, this is above my pay grade here. So he says, the fruits are limited and they're temporary. Even when you attain Svarga, once your punya runs out, shine punye, lokam vishanti. Then you have to come back down here to this dud place. So Krishna says, those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods, but my devotees ultimately reach my supreme planet. So why go the scenic route? The scenic route can be nice. I brought up our scenic route on the east side, the windward side of the Big Island. As you're driving north from Hilo, up the Hamakua Highway, you get about 4 miles north of Hilo, and then you'll see a sign that says scenic route. Or if you're coming in, then maybe a couple miles beyond that, and it'll be the other end of this road. And this is the Onomea Road. And this goes down through a couple of old villages, and then around, and the scenery is just incredible. It's this really super gorgeous, really lush, tropical heaven. So it's such a beautiful drive. It's, you know, if you just drive, it's maybe adds 15, maybe 20 minutes to your drive. And if you're not in a hurry to get into town or out of town, and you want to take that scenic route, that's cool. And then you get around to Onomea Bay, where Onomea Bay is, and it's, especially if the sun's out and you got white fluffy clouds, it's so beautiful. And people stop and they take pictures, and it's mesmerizing. And there are some wealthy people who actually own homes up on the hills around Onomea Bay, which is like, God, if you lived there, how could you never want to die? So it's there, it's nice, but if you leave, let's say, my wife and I used to live in Honolulu, which is about 11, 12 miles outside of Hilo, and if we had an appointment in Hilo at a certain time and we left in time to make it for that appointment, we knew that there's no way we were doing the Onomea Road, because we'd be late. So if we had something to do, boom, there's no tourist stuff, no sightseeing. Go straight to your thing. So Krishna's saying, why take the scenic route? Why bother with that? And so Maitreya is just emphasizing in his conversation with Vidura that when we're talking about our friend Krishna, when we're talking about who we're talking about is actually directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so therefore these all these topics are all inherently auspicious. So that's another one of the grooves that we like to kind of like see if we can dig ever more deeply each day. That samskara of Bhagawatam. And I'm going to stop. Are there any quick questions or comments?
You said, literature says that persons who do not worship Lord Vishnu are demons. Is that correct? Source?
Those who are inclined not to worship, that's a nice way of saying averse to worshiping the Lord.
Opposed to worshiping Krishna.
Let me see what he said. That was in today's purport, right? Oh, oops, sorry. No. I'm not going to find it there. Yeah, those who worship Lord Vishnu are called demigods, and those who do not do so are called asuras. So these are broad categories. And there are nuances, there are gradations along the way. It's a spectrum. And since I'm there, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has a one-sentence commentary on this verse. He says, the Devatas here are remembering the mercy of the Lord to the devotees in order to show how easy the process of bhakti is. The process of bhakti is essentially taking shelter of the Lord, taking shelter of remembering the Lord's lotus feet. And then from there, engaging in any kind of service to the Lord's lotus feet. Oh, and then he says here, Srila Prabhupada writes that sometimes, he says, Lord Vishnu always takes the side of the Devatas. Brahman, Shiva, sometimes take the side of the demigods, not because they share, the demons, not because they share the demons' interests, but in order to gain control over the demons. So they kind of go in with, nice words or whatever, give a little blessing to kind of get their attention, and then they just get a hook in them. And it's quite often, as we see in the Bhagavatam, this control is a way of creating an opening for the devatas to gain an advantage and attain victory. Okay, thank you so much. Dhantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam, Gita. Some way to go, Dr. Vindikita. Thank you. Oh, do we need to turn that thing off? Phone?